Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. So moving on to part 2 of understanding how drugs can affect the energy body. In the first part, we talked about alcohol and tobacco and marijuana, and everything that I had to say about those things is relevant for the things I'm going to talk about. So in this episode, I want to talk about what you additionally need to know if you're using something heavier. So if you're using cocaine or meth or ecstasy or heroin or any of the psychedelic drugs, so peyote, ayahuasca, and I know there are a bunch of other plant medicines that are popular, but generally they have kind of the same outline. And as I've said, people who have this be part of the exploration and engagement of their life often have a variety of things that they've engaged with. And one thing that's true is the more chronic the engagement, the more severe some of these outcomes can be. But for some people, a one-time use can be really problematic. So I'm sad to say that a significant portion of my shamanic practice is helping people who used ayahuasca and are now having massive problems with entities and with just being able to function normally in the world, with being able to work a normal job. And for sure, there are a lot of people who have ayahuasca experiences and really enjoy them and are very, very happy about them. So I'm not coming down on an ayahuasca is terrible. However, I think that people don't necessarily understand what it does as fully as they could, so they may not get to informed consent. And this podcast, if you have used ayahuasca or if you're thinking of using ayahuasca, gives you the map of the rehabilitation of your energy body that I would argue is necessary for anyone who uses that. And for people who are very experienced, who are using this in a very conscious way as part of their practice and have a lot of mastery of reading and tracking their energy body, this is probably less relevant because they probably have these practices woven into their life anyway. So they're already caring for themselves after an ayahuasca journey in these ways. So backing up, when we're talking about things like cocaine and meth and heroin and things like that, and sometimes ayahuasca or peyote, one of the things that can happen that is different from something like alcohol or tobacco or marijuana is it can make the body think that you're dying. And so we have this interesting experience. There's this movement that we have between worlds, and sometimes that can actually be the power of the plant medicine as you get into a state that is still connected to your human essence. You're still tethered to your physical body and your human incarnation experience, but you're also sort of between worlds in that connection to your higher self, to your soul, to the experience that you have when you're not in a body. And from that perspective of literally being between worlds for a little while, it can be a powerful place for your innate intelligence to offload some toxic messages and cultural conditioning and patterning and things that aren't so good. And there can be a lot of ecstasy and joy and really good feelings that come from hacking chemistry. And I know that people who use drugs tend to bear the burden of censor and judgment and condemnation, but I would argue that across the board, humans right and left are hacking their reward chemistry. We eat sugar, which hacks our reward chemistry. We indulge in Facebook that hits our social rewards. Like, there are all these ways that we do things that get us a chemistry that we really like. And some of these are a little more extreme. One of the things, just a little bit of a digression that I find interesting, is some of the chemistry that happens in the first moments of romantic love, like that first 6 months or the first 3 months. It lights up a lot of the same parts of the brain that cocaine does. So there's a heck of a rush. And for some people, romantic love and sex are more their drugs of choice. Fortunately, if you're hacking your chemistry internally, it's not going to have the effects that I'm going to talk about. So if you're someone who's addicted to sex and love, there can be some other aspects that might want some cleanup, but you're probably not damaging your energetic field in these ways. So one of the things that can happen with cocaine or meth or heroin is our body thinks that it's dying. And what happens when we die is we begin to have our chakras rise up. So starting with the root chakra, we withdraw our connection and our tether to the earth, and the root chakra joins with the sacral chakra that then moves up into the solar plexus and so on and so forth until all the chakras have collapsed into one and integrated with the crown chakra. And from there, our essence travels from middle world, which is the human realm, to upper world, which is the realm of the soul, and reintegrates with our higher self. And this process can be activated with drugs, and the challenge can be that our chakras don't necessarily come back into their rightful place because people seldom have practices on the other side that restore their energy body. So you could think of it if you're, sitting in a chair and a wave of the ocean comes in and you don't want to get your shoes wet, so you lift up your feet. But the trouble is, it's like you never put your feet back down. And so over time, there are a lot of health problems that happen because when our energy isn't fully occupying our body, we don't have the chakras turned on properly, everything isn't in its correct place, the body labors a lot harder to sustain itself. So dissociation and disconnection often correlate to chronic health problems, autoimmune issues, a lot of just gnarly health stuff that's hard to pin down and resolve. And so there can be health issues down the road, and there can also be interface issues. So the thing that I was talking about in the previous podcast, where it's harder to effectively relate to the world, can be one of the challenges that arises. And so what we want to do is get your energy body to come back fully into its correct human configuration. So at the most neutral level, it's totally okay to be a soul in upper world. It's totally okay to be walking between worlds. It's totally okay to be organizing your energy into the human configuration. But if you have a physical body and you don't have your chakras alive and being fed and your meridians being fed and your auric field strong, your outcomes and your ability to have a happy, joyful life are going to be really diminished. It's going to be really exhausting and hard. So think about if you only slept 2 hours and then you have to go into a desk job and try to stay awake. That's a tough day for most of us. Even if we throw back a bunch of coffee, it's just when there's underlying fatigue and exhaustion, it's hard to function. There's a study that said several hours of sleep deprivation has as much of an effect in reducing reaction times and responsiveness as being over the legal limit with alcohol. So it's incredibly impactful when you're not in your body able to engage in the proper way. And so there's a lot of different ways to restore this. To be honest, if this is something that's been part of your path and it's in your budget, I would strongly recommend a soul retrieval. These drugs cause a lot of soul loss. It tends to scatter soul parts. And so when I work with a client who's had heavy drug use in the past, and usually it's heavy drug use. If you tried cocaine once and, then lived a pretty healthy lifestyle, probably not that big a deal. But if you've had any chronic use, including alcohol or marijuana or smoking to a lesser degree, you could have really scattered soul parts. And so having a soul retrieval is really wise. And having a shamanic practitioner who has the skill set to coax your chakras and your energy body back into their proper configuration is important. And that's something that, in my experience, far fewer shamanic practitioners know how to do. So that's something that I can offer, and they're, looking around and asking that question, getting someone who has history and experience with, just putting it all back, putting your roots back in the ground, putting your chakras back in place, getting them all reoriented is important. And then once you've had that restorative work of getting your soul parts back and getting your energy body dropped back into the proper place, then all the restorative practices we talked in part 1 of this podcast are really going to be super helpful. So you'll want to basically rehab with qigong or time in nature or breath work or yoga. There are lots of different ways to work on this, and the intervention done by someone else is one part of the puzzle. It's kind of like if you treat with chiropractic, the chiropractor has the skill to put everything back where it belongs, but you probably want to do care and exercises and stretching and put yourself in good positions when you sleep and sit at your desk and all of that to maintain the effectiveness of the work. So with these kind of things, it's really good to be in a collaborative relationship with your practitioner. I wish I could do it from the outside because I know daily practices can be really hard to sustain. I do not meditate as often as would be advisable for me, but there really is no other way around it for really getting to thriving and having fully restored health and a fully restored energy body. Acupuncture can also be really supportive for this. So lots of different modalities, but really understanding that mechanism where your chakras may have begun their journey to the other side and got trapped halfway in between. And that's going to really mess with things like your money outcomes, because the lower chakras are all about safety and stability. So people who don't have their energy in their lower chakras seldom have good experiences with having enough money in a way that isn't a struggle. So there's just going to be a lot more ease in your life at the level of circumstance if your chakras are where they belong in the anatomy of your energy body. So moving on to plant medicine. So we're talking about peyote and ayahuasca and mushrooms and things like that. And what those do is they crack open your awareness so you can have potentially a visionary experience. So they do the things I talked about with the other drugs, especially if it's a strong dose, where especially ayahuasca can make you think that you're dying. And so your energy body can implement that protocol to begin the journey to the other side. And it can rip open your auric field. And this isn't necessarily the end of the world. If you had appendicitis and they took your appendix out, they do a lot of damage along the way. They cut through layers and layers of healthy tissue and they sew it back up, and they can introduce bacteria no matter how clean it is. So you need a round of antibiotics, and there's a lot of damage that can happen. However, if the surgery is conducted really skillfully, the ultimate benefit of extricating what was causing harm offsets the damage that can be done. And so when it comes to something like ayahuasca or peyote or any of these plant medicines, you'll have much, much better results if you're in a small group. Everyone's getting cracked open, and so I cringe probably for the same reasons that a surgeon would cringe about field surgery, which is you're so vulnerable when you don't have the natural skin of your auric field intact. When you've been cracked open, you can have these amazing visionary experiences and you can release a lot of dense energy, but you're also vulnerable to things coming in. So when people do plant medicine in high doses in really big groups of people, there's a lot more potential for energetic intrusions and things that aren't yours, and the damage to the auric field can take longer to heal up. So one of the things my guides have really showed me about these plant medicines is when you look at them in historical context, how they were used back in the day by indigenous societies, my guides say they generally took much, much smaller doses for initiation, and they did it in the context of having a lot of mastery and other kinds of initiation first. So people who have better outcomes with ayahuasca and plant medicine are people who don't need them to get into an altered state. They've already trained their awareness. They already know how to go to the other side. They know how to steer and drive. So a very small amount will get them to a highly visionary experience. And they can track their own energy field. They know how to clean up intrusions afterwards. They can see where their energy body needs restoration afterwards and know how to take care of that. And one of the questions that I think is worth asking if you're considering plant medicine is whether your life is more a story of success or more a story of not working. So the more of a mess your life is, the more maladaptive behaviors, the more maladaptive thinking patterns you have, the more it might be worth this really intense intervention. And again, smaller doses, not repeated frequently, and expect that you're going to have a 6-month rehabilitation, 3 to 6 months on the other side, where you really probably do need to do qigong. You really do need to just work to have your energy, your roots come back in the ground, your chakras drop back into the right places, your the rips and tears being rewoven, any energy intrusions getting cleared out. And a better space holder will make this better. A smaller dose will reduce the effect of this. Some people are way more sensitive to others, so there are people who literally one dose, I'm working with them years after the fact, and they're still having a really, really hard time. And granted, they waited a long time and had a bunch of things that they tried first and other practitioners who didn't know how to do this before they came to me. So, if I'd had the opportunity to work with them a lot sooner, it could have been a lot better. But it's just really useful to understand the mechanism, that it's ripping through layers of your auric field to give you access to non-ordinary reality. The filter that lets us be in ordinary reality gets opened, and then we're perceiving non-ordinary reality, which is really powerful. That's totally what I do as a shamanic practitioner. I listen to a drum and I perceive non-ordinary reality, and then I can fix things and get your soul parts back and do all this amazing work, track past lives, clean them up. It's magnificent to access non-ordinary reality, but because I'm doing it with a drum and with trained awareness, I'm not damaging anything about my auric field. I'm not destroying the natural barrier in order to get past it temporarily, and how quickly and how effectively that natural barrier restores varies widely from person to person. So for some people, they just kind of naturally know they have past lives where they've used ayahuasca or mushrooms frequently, and they just kind of know how to open it up. Mushrooms, much less likely to have this problem than something like ayahuasca. There's definitely a scale of intensity. But if that barrier doesn't come back into place, you're going to have a lot of the symptoms that look like someone who's schizophrenic. And again, I think most people who do ayahuasca come out okay on the other side, but I would offer that just make sure you've fully explored the non-damaging approaches, because a soul retrieval isn't going to leave your energy body damaged. Learning to journey with a drum into non-ordinary reality can be frustrating. It takes longer. We really like instant gratification, and I think some of these plant medicines are boom, a short time later you're going to be having a visionary experience and connected to all that is, which can feel really radiant and wonderful. And unfortunately, I think some of the marketing language that gets used by people who are making a lot of money with ayahuasca and who genuinely believe in it, I think that there are people who've had really good results and want to share that. So I'm not implying that their intentions are bad. If you go down to Peru, there's a lot of money involved, so things can get wonky as far as, how people represent and what they sell and things like that. But the marketing language sometimes ends up being like doing something hard and heroic. Face your fears, go to the ultimate spiritual challenge. You will grow and change. Be courageous enough to take this thing that's going to make you throw up. And I cringe about people feeling like they should do this thing that there's some parts of them saying this isn't a good idea in order to be the spiritual warrior, in order to be courageous, in order to get past their stuff. Because what I like about the work that I do is ideally someone can be relaxed and really safe, and so they can organically and naturally open up their auric field, and then we can extract out some of this toxic stuff. And for sure it's slower, but it's like if you can use non-Western medicine and genuinely repair a condition, it's going to be a lot easier. Western medicine is harsh. It does a lot of damage along the way. I'm so grateful for it. Like, don't get me wrong. Totally glad I have Western medicine. There are things that I don't have to worry about dying of that my ancestors did, even with magnificent access to herbal wisdom and all that cool stuff. However, anytime I need to take a round of antibiotics, it's expensive. It damages my digestive system. I feel icky, and I'm super grateful, but I do everything I can not to need to go to that extreme. And so I would just invite you to consider training with listening to the drum and being a little patient and getting forms of healing that have less of a downside. And again, I know there's a lot of personal preference here. There are a lot of people who really love ayahuasca, for whom it's worked really well. It's been a powerful experience. Just know that in indigenous cultures, the people would have taken lower doses, had a lot of training, so they knew how to track and use these abilities. It wasn't an or, they weren't doing it instead of this kind of soul healing and development of capacity. As a result, they needed lower doses because they could work collaboratively with their awareness and their focus and intention. The shaman who was holding space was someone with whom they had a deep, lifelong relationship, who was responsible for the care of the community. So you weren't going away. This person was going to see how you were in a week and in a month and in 6 months. And if something wasn't working right, they were responsible for helping you to be fully restored. And Indigenous people spend a ton of time out in nature, and that's very healing to the energy body. So if you're somebody who flies down to Peru for a weekend or gets together with a group of people in a private residence and does 3 rounds of, ayahuasca or San Pedro or something, and then, goes back to work on Monday under fluorescent lights, you're in for potentially a really hard time of it. And the interface of being able to just manage being in linear time and track commitments and have our brain work in this really executive way that is necessary for a lot of the things we do in the modern era can be really compromised. And so that feeling of brain fog is no fun when you're trying to get your system to do something where its ability is actually compromised. If your arms are super tired and you're trying to carry something heavy, that's hard. And I would argue that some of the functions of everyday life get a lot harder. So if you absolutely feel called to ayahuasca, or if you've already done ayahuasca or peyote or San Pedro or mushrooms or any of these other things, the invitation is just to do some rebuilding of your auric field. Do the restoration of getting your chakras back in place if that feels like something that's gone off course for you, either with facilitated help or if you have some mastery, you may be able to do it on your own. But if you don't know exactly how to do it, you may need some help with that. And then the rebuilding of the auric field. Just like if you had your appendix out, you would need to heal all the depth of the cut that went in, very, very, very deep cut. And I would argue that there are rips and cuts in your auric field, and you need to clean out any energy that came in while you were cracked open, and you need to repair and restore the auric field that got ripped open by the plant medicine so that you can go back to being healthy. And if you're willing to do daily qigong for 3 to 6 months afterwards and track your auric field, or do yoga and, space these out, take a smaller dose, do it in a smaller group, this is something that potentially can be a really amazing part of your journey. Again, I'm really conservative. One of the experiences I personally had was doing San Pedro down in Peru. And it was an interesting experience. It was on the land of someone who grew the San Pedro, so it was outdoors, which was really beautiful. They did stuff us back in cabs on the way back to Cusco while we were still pretty altered, which wasn't super great. But I have a really good team of guides, so they could hold me even though the facilitator was a little MIA and just over it before it was out of my system. I took a half dose and I was knocked flatter than anyone else. I literally ended up laying on the ground when other people were walking around and talking, and it allowed some really heavy stuff to clear out of my chakras that I probably would have fought the movement of because it was so painful coming out. And if I tried to shut down its moving out of my chakras into the earth, I would have thrown up. And I don't like to throw up, so I just breathed through it, and it was intense. I would not argue that I couldn't have cleaned those out another way just by having some good energetic facilitation. I probably would have needed another person to hold space for me, so I felt safe enough for that to release. But certainly with the money I spent on the San Pedro, I could have afforded the good energetic facilitation. But because the stuff was lodged pretty deep, I wasn't even aware that it was there. But the effect of it, so I went on this trip to Peru, I had this experience, I came back, and nobody booked for about 3 weeks. And one of the interesting things about my practice is I could tell you how I do AdWords, and I have a website, and I get the word out. But at the end of the day, if I'm aligned with working with people and in my belly, I truly want to be of service in this way, people just book. So there's a real organic, like if I'm tired, I need to deal with tired so that people will show up. But Spirit seems to mostly do my advertising. The right people find me. They're not even sure how they got there. And there's this marvelous way of getting to share this work. And I was super concerned because this was a full-time gig, this was my livelihood. And so it was survivable with credit cards and all, but it was a really big deal that the energy where I could be found and I could interface in my business in a way that resulted in being able to do work on behalf of people and have them pay me for it was offline. It took about 3 weeks for that to restore. And that was really disruptive. So at other times, I had groups of friends who invited me, hey, we're having people over, we're going to do San Pedro. And I loved the people and I loved the idea of having an experience with them. But the take apart factor, doing that much take apart in one fell swoop, and it takes apart good things as well as not so good things, was too expensive. I'm like, I can't afford to, not have money flow in my practice for 3 weeks. That would be really disruptive, however cool the experience was. So there was a part of me that was really drawn toward another experience, and there was a part of me that was really like, what this is going to cost me, I just can't justify it. It's like the thing you'd really love to buy or the trip you'd really love to go on, but you're like, oh, that's going to end up on credit cards, and I just can't justify it, much as I wish that it were different. There are crystals that I'm like, I'd love for you to come home with me, but the balance of my life would not be served by spending that much money on a particular piece. And so we all make these trade-offs. And so what I would offer about these substances is getting to informed consent. I certainly don't want to tell you what to do. Some people work better with this medicine than others. It depends on your past life history. It depends on how much these practices are part of your life anyway. And it depends on your sober mastery of the skill set. So someone who is deeply skillful in their shamanic abilities, who uses this in a really conscious, calibrated way while in conversation with their own team of guides and has incredible discernment about picking a space holder and a facilitator, is going to have a wildly different experience than someone who happened to know a friend of a friend who thought it would be cool to come do this thing. And if you are going to do it, I do think that there's a lot of wisdom to picking someone who is an indigenous practitioner, who has the cultural heritage. And there's a need for care with that, because one of the things that really, frankly, sucks about the modern era is that indigenous people who've kept their ways alive often are in much more economic struggle. And so the social justice and the restorative justice of that is something I feel strongly about, but I won't digress into other than mentioning it. But that being said, the discernment of economic incentive, making someone offer something to the world that isn't as clean as it could be, can be a little problematic. And I'm not saying that applies in every case, but just using some extra discernment. There's a lot of money in the ayahuasca tourist trade, and even, domestically in the United States, if that's something you're seeking, you can find it. I get emails every month of people wanting to know if I can turn them on to this. They're not asking for soul retrieval. They're just looking for me to bridge them to that kind of experience. But I do think that if you have someone who has the cultural background, much like a sweat lodge, it doesn't mean that someone of European ancestry couldn't train enough to be good at it, but there are a lot of times that people feel like 6 months of something makes them qualified. And there's a horrible story of a man who killed a bunch of his friends and went to jail for it. He had this like, pay $10,000 and we're going to do this really extreme initiation. And he left people in the desert for a long time and then put him into a sweat lodge. And a number of people died because he just didn't have the background. He didn't know how to do these initiations really safely. And so that can increase. So a lot of discernment about how deeply and how long the person has worked with these kind of plant medicines. And I think that if they have a history of them being used in context of the culture and a really healthy relationship to that indigenous culture, that can be a little bit of an advantage. And it can be really nice if it's someone who helps you rehabilitate your energetic field on the other side. So if you had your appendix out, the medical model is going to keep track of you until that deep, deep cut into your body is healed. And they're going to watch you and they're going to provide care and they're going to change the dressing and they'll eventually take the stitches out. Like, they do all these things. And so the model where people have these experiences and then they're held through them and then just turned loose after that and not deeply facilitated in the rehabilitation on the other side tends to be a little problematic. So I know I have a little bit of a soapbox. Please forgive me if you're like, you don't understand. This has been the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, I believe you. And those aren't the clients that come to me who've had their auric field really damaged and are struggling to function and hold a job and are terrified because of the entities that are attached to them. You know, people have a lot of different outcomes. If most people had the outcomes of the clients that come to me, people wouldn't do it because there would just be way too many people who said that was a horrible experience. But what I'm concerned with, like, if you have a really bad outcome where things get a lot harder afterwards, so you'll seek help. My concern is all the people whose energy body is damaged that never really gets properly repaired. So they go forth in the world, without realizing the energetic intrusions and the damage to their auric field. And so knowing a little more of the picture of what the medicine does, of having your energy body sometimes move as if you were dying, and putting the chakras back in place and rebuilding the energy body is super, super helpful. So just as a really quick note, the one thing I didn't mention that functions a little differently than the things I have mentioned is ecstasy. So ecstasy used occasionally, probably not a big deal from an energetic body standpoint, but if used regularly, it rewires how we try to move connection. And so it doesn't make you think you're dying, so you don't get that like chakras trying to go to the light. But it does mess with the wiring of your chakras and the meridians so they don't function properly. So it's like if you had an inverter and you started plugging wires into different pathways, they're going to have some weird outcomes. So just as a side note, still the same process, rehabilitate your auric field. Probably not a big deal unless you're a special case. If you feel really energetically ill afterwards, get some support, do some qigong, spend some time in nature, put your roots back into the ground. We just really want our energy bodies to be the design that works with the physical human body. There's just a really specific configuration of healthy chakras and healthy meridians and an auric field that's filtering out other people's stuff but is still permeable to love and light and allows us to have a really effective human experience. And when we get disconnected from that, when we have soul loss, when our chakras aren't in the right place, when there are rips and tears in our auric field, there's this subtle or not so subtle unpleasantness and awfulness that we feel. And because our culture is woefully uneducated about our energy bodies, we often don't have the right means to troubleshoot it. We're like, is this chronic fatigue? Do I need to go see my doctor? Do I need to drink some more green juice? And yet it's really this auric field. And good news, if you have really healthy physical body practices, those will be helpful for the auric field. So if you're eating a lot of green food and getting a lot of exercise and getting the right amount of sleep and managing your stress levels, those are all really restorative things. But if you've done a lot of damage, a little bit of extra rehab may be needed. And so thank you so much for listening. And I just hope this helps you to be at full choice and have discernment. And if you do feel really authentically called to some of these things, you know how to restore yourself afterwards, and you have a better understanding of the price of admission for a particular experience. Because the people who are inviting you, the people who really want to share an experience because they love you and it's awesome and they're doing it, they just want connection. They're coming from this place of please, please, please join me. It'll be super fun. And the people this is their livelihood, they have an economic investment. And I genuinely think, honestly, a belief that they're helping people, but they're just not talking about here are the downsides, here are the upsides, will help you get to an informed choice. People who have a vested interest in you joining, however benevolent, aren't necessarily going to tell you the downsides. And when we're gathering information, we often hear about it from people who are either really pro, like, yes, this is the best thing ever, you should do it, or really anti, so they're offering a lot of scare tactics and, this is why this is horrible. And, like I said in the last podcast, the, frying egg, this is your brain on drugs. I know a lot of very healthy, high-functioning, successful, amazing people who are doing great in their lives, who experimented with all the things that they said would fry your brain, and that wasn't what went down. Not optimal, but the human system can be very, very restorative. So it's just about fully restoring things if you have something that you put in your body that takes you out of the equilibrium that you were in before. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.